All right. Quite a bit has happened since my last stream for this series. And that's partly because sometimes I really do just need time to myself to code this kind of stuff. I think I've changed the scope of the project though. I've made it a little bit larger. So originally, the plan was the plan was to build something robust, but now there's going to be even more focus in this series in building something that is robust for the long term. And by the way, for those that are just coming into this stream and don't know what this series is all about, this is me preparing for a series I'm going to make on creating a goal setting app. And the goal setting part of it, that's not the important part. The important thing is that this series is going to be very focused on building an app that is a bit more future proof than most beginner series apps. And I did a bit of a poll on Twitter, and it looks like people are less interested in getting started and they're more interested in help me build something robust so that it's going to last in the future. Man, might need my glasses on. I've been wearing glasses and I'm kind of on the edge now of needing to wear glasses long term, which is sorry, closer up because I'm short-sighted and I can see things I can see like my computer screen okay, but I think it's not quite good enough and I might need to get new glasses for that soon. But anyway, I don't know why you would care about that. So let's run Quasar dev here. We'll have to jump into front and then run Quasar dev. Ah, and all right, where did I leave things? No, let's try no glasses. Yeah, okay, I'll try no glasses. So yeah, so basically, one of the things that I discovered that I've been like stressing about a lot, honestly, for about 2 or 3 years, is how to abstract dialogues and at what level abstraction I do with dialogue. So, for example, with this dialogue here, by the way, this is the answer that I landed on. What I could do is I could put my create logic on the dialogue itself, right? So I could say, this dialogue is also going to actually create the model itself. But I have a problem with that because I don't think a dialogue should be concerned with creating models. I think it should be, even if it's a create model dialogue, I think what it should do is create the interface, but then alert the parent of when it is ready to then create the model. So that's what's happening here. You'll notice that the dialogue actually emits create. So this dialogue has got a create button on it, and I'm probably going to wrap that so it's a bit more flexible in the future, but we'll leave it like this for now. And so it doesn't create it, it emits to the parent, telling it to then perform the create action. Same with the form. So the form is actually modeled 2 times down here. And this is one of the things that I also wasn't so sure about, but I've decided I think this is the best approach. The dialogue actually receives the form as well. So it's not just receiving, oh, what am I saying? Yeah, so this form goes down into the dialogue and then it's accepted here. But then that form goes down into the schema form. So it goes one level deeper, and then that's what's in charge of displaying the form. So I think this creates a really nice separation of concerns here where the dialogue does kind of need to know about the form because it's a create model. Okay, so I'm kind of talking myself into a corner now. And this is what's tough about this. Do I give the dialogue knowledge of the form, or do I inject the form into the dialogue with a template like this? Template, and then you could have something like body or content or whatever. This could just be the default slot. And then you can throw the form in like this, right? So you can compose things that way. So that's the other way I could have gone about it. And this is what I'm still not sure about. Like, I feel like this API is a little bit cleaner. So yeah, I don't know, but I think I'm going to stick with this for now because ultimately this is going to be very reusable code. I'm always going to be creating create model dialogue type things, and I don't want the creation to happen on the dialogue itself because its context might change the way that it's created, right? Or maybe I want to perform an action after this is created, and I find it a lot easier and a bit easier to code in such a way that all of that logic, kind of that nitty gritty logic of how the page works as one, sits on the page rather than the component itself. All right, I don't know if any of this is making sense, so I'm going to jump out of here. I'm talking way too much. My plan here was just a code with you guys watching, but this is what ended up happening. So the thing I'm focusing on now is this use update resource composable, and I'm trying to figure out the API that I want here. Yeah, that's right, because I was thinking about sending some initial data through, which you probably need for an update resource. But at this level, I think I might actually send through an object. And by the way, this is where TypeScript comes in handy, but I don't want this to be a TypeScript project until later on. We'll then convert it to TypeScript so that it's kind of, I'm casting a wider net then. So I'm thinking we accept an ID in here. So maybe we just make this an options object and we do that at the top. So we can say, for example, options. And I'm thinking initial data and the ID is going to come out of this options object. So we could say, for example, here, initial data equals options dot initial data. And that can already be a ref. If it's already a ref, then if you wrap a ref in a ref, you end up with just a plain old ref, which is kind of a really cool trick to know about. So we've got initial data there. And if we don't have initial data, then we're just going to set that to an object. I think that's what I want. Yeah. So here's the tricky part, though. I need to have some logic around figuring out the ID, because here's basically what I want. If object has an ID, use it, right? And then you might say if object has a UID, use it. And then we might say above all of that, though, see, finding the ID is difficult because I want it to be as streamlined as possible, but give people the option of supplying their own primary key. So then we could say here, if ID supplied, use supplied ID. And I think that might be it. So let's just start with that. So if ID is supplied, use that ID. We can say, how about this? Let ID is equal to undefined. A ref, I think, of undefined. Oh, no, because if we've got a supplied ID, see, this is where it gets hard. Because if we have a supplied ID in the options, then we want to wrap that. So we'll just define that we've got an ID. And then we can say if options.id, so if an ID was supplied, then we say ID is equal to a ref of options.id. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. If an ID wasn't supplied, then we basically hit into this zone here. If object has an ID, use it. Okay, so basically what I'm saying here is if the initial data, so we should change that to initial data, has an ID, then use it. So then we need to say if we have initial data and we have initial data.id, then that's what we will be using as our ID. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. So in that case, we say ID is equal to a ref of initial data ID. All right. By the way, this is the part I'm worst at with programming. The what do you call this? The logic, which is funny because a lot of programming is logic, but a lot of it is also architecture and basically caring enough about your API and seeing the bigger picture. I feel like I tend to be a little bit better at that, but then the nitty gritty logic I'm really bad at, which is kind of, I don't know, there's kind of an irony in that, I think. So if initial data has an ID, use it. That's kind of what I've done here. If initial data has a UID, then use that. So then I guess you could do an else statement here. Else if or at this point we could say, how about this? If we don't have initial data at all, we'll just return there. We wouldn't really return though, would we? We just want to get out of this else block. Okay, let's just carry on. I'm going to ignore that little tangent I went on there. But I do want to narrow. Yeah, okay. Then we can say if initial data and I'll probably just refactor this in a moment. Initial data dot UID. And we might also do UUID. And I'm seeing a lot of else ifs, so I'm thinking this might actually end up being better as an array when I refactor, but we'll just bench that for now. Then in that case, we say ID is equal to initial data UID. Now, some people use UUIDs, which is totally fine. And in that case, we say ID is equal to the UUID. Now, how else could I do this? What I could do is I could hard code possible IDs. So we could say const, what do I call this? Identifiers is equal to, and then we could say ID, and honestly, this is a one-liner, ID, UID, and then UUID. So what I could now do, actually, this might work better as an object. Then how would I use it as an object? That's all right. I think this is fine. So now we can say identifiers dot for each, or maybe even this would be a fine because then I can sort of exit the loop early. We'll see how it goes. Identifier. And then we can basically say if, and by the way, I don't want to run any of this unless I have initial data. So if not initial data, then we'll run this. Yeah, this is getting deeply nested. So there's definitely some refactoring I'll have to do. So then we can say if initial data has got that identifier. Oh no, this has to be if initial data. And we might actually say type of is equal to an object. That's probably a bit safer. All right. So if we have that, then we can go ahead and say, hey, the ID is equal to a ref of initial data and then that identifier. And just to simplify this a little bit, we can say const ID value, I guess. And we can basically then say if we've got an ID value, then the ref will be equal to that. So we're only running this once. Oh, then again, I don't think that actually improved the code, so I'm going to get rid of that. All right, so that means I can get rid of all of this now. And in the future, if it makes sense, we can then add on to our list of identifiers. Okay, this is no longer needed. I don't think we need any of that anymore. And now we need to basically have a case to say, hey, if we still don't have an ID, if after all of that we still don't have an ID, then we say ID is equal to just an empty ref. All right. So that's, I think, all of the code for deciding on what our ID is going to be. Oh, okay, so this has to be dot value. Oh, I need to have a return statement now. So ID equals, and we'll do, and we'll return true here, which will break that find loop. Now, why isn't that working? I thought you could just send through a function. What have I done wrong here? I'm not seeing it. Oh, okay, otherwise we'll return false. All right, so what's wrong with this now? Okay, looks like I didn't say const here. All right, so we've got our initial data. All right, I think that's what I want to do. So I wanted something that can um, make it easy. So if your object already has an ID, we're going to use that to perform the update. But if the object is not, but if you want, you can then supply your own ID. So if that ID has been supplied, then all of this is going to be skipped. Yeah, okay. And I'm going to do this refactoring in my own time because I find it difficult to refactor when people are watching in a live stream. All right, so then, oh gosh, now I need to get my brain back in this. So we have our form service, which just allows us to play around with the form. Our schema service, this makes it easy for me to deal with the schema. What's going on here? Oh, that's the updated resource. So I don't really like where that is. I think I'd rather put it there. And I think this whole thing actually can be extracted to its own function, probably in another file. So maybe like we'll call this like guess ID, perhaps. Yeah, let's see where this is. And maybe helpers in there. And let's create a new file in here called guess object ID. Export a function that's going to receive an ID. And I might just, looks like it's going to be everything inside of here. Guess object ID. And that means we can also extract all of this as well. All right, so we don't receive an ID there. We receive an object. So what do we call this? OBJ, I guess. Oh, thank you, DevPro. Especially with a name like that, that means a lot to hear that coming from a DevPro. So then initial data is now going to be OBJ, and we won't have value on there because when this is passed through, we will destructure that. Yeah, I love it too. It's something really special, I think. Hmm. This is going to be tough. I think this is going to take me a while to sort of figure out what this is going to look like, but it will totally be worth it for the API. By the way, let me just pause for a second and show you what I want for the API. I want to be able to eventually say use update goal, and there's actually another abstraction I'll add on top of that at one point, but this is basically it. And then we can say const, for example, goal updater is equal to that. And then I want to be able to send in the, oh, what does it look like? Yeah, so that'll already have the schema. I want to be able to send in, for example, the ID is equal to whatever, or maybe like initial value, initial data. I don't know if I like that API actually, but initial data set to something like name, or I think as we've got it, goal, my goal, something like that. And then in that initial data, we're also going to have an ID equal to something like 5. And so what I want is this to automatically notice, oh, it's got an ID of 5. Or to make this a little bit more flexible, I want it to be able to say, oh, it's got a UID of such and such. So I'm going to use that to update it. Or it's got a UUID of such and such, and therefore I'll use that to update it. Or let's just say we've got something like my primary key here, and that's equal to something. Then what you can do is just say ID is equal to, see, this is a good question. How does this then work? Do we send through a ref as the ID? Yeah, all right, this is a tough one. do I send through? Okay, so in this case, it takes it in and then it wraps it in a ref. But if I send my own ID, do I say what the identifier is, or do I literally pass through the ID itself here? I think you send through the ID itself. Yeah. So you'd say, for example, rather than my primary key like that, in this scenario, you'd say ID is equal to, and then you'd have a ref somewhere with whatever your ID is. So then if you needed, for example, this could be like ID ref, and then you could say const ID ref here is equal to, and then you could go ahead and change that yourself. Yeah. All right. I think that's the idea. And then maybe we could have it so you can then say, because you'll get that initial data back. Oh, I don't think I'd even call that initial data. I think I just call it data. Yeah, you don't need to say initial because that's implied. So let's get rid of the word initial here and change it to data. Yeah, so then you can send through the data and then the ID ref. All right, am I happy with that? So then I can say goal updater dot, and then how do you update it? What did I decide on for this? Here's our update command. It's simply executing the GraphQL query. How's that query being made? Form service dot form dot value. Okay, so it's making its own version using the form service. Yeah, so we really got to take the time to actually write out what this API is going to look like first. Otherwise, I'm going to sink a lot of time into this that could end up being redone. I might just use this README for now. No, we'll create another one. Let's just duplicate this called API.md. That'll do. Is that going to give me syntax highlighting? Okay, it looks like it might. That's good. But let's make it JavaScript, because really this is just JavaScript. Okay, so I'm imagining got something like that, but that's not how you'd actually use it. You'd say const goal service is equal to use resource, I think it is, use update goal. So this could be like goal updater. Yeah, so then you could say use update goal, something like that. And this is the important part. If we can get this right, then it all falls into place. So then the goal updater can receive a form, but it doesn't have to, I don't think. Let's close that out. If I can figure out this API by the end of this, the next 20 minutes or so, then I'd be very happy. Why do they look the same? Okay, because this is use update resource. Use update resource. Let's just figure that one out first. So it receives a schema. So then we could say here, goal schema. Okay, so that's how it knows what it looks like. And then this data is going to be the initial data for that goal. So let's just say we've got a bunch of goals. Const, I'll even just create, I'll just do one hard coded for now. So like goal is equal to, I don't know, gym twice a week. And then this is going to have, actually the way it looks because we're using Strapi is this. which I don't really like, but I think there's a good reason that they do this because it gives them more flexibility. And then they have the ID at this level. So it might be something like 56. So the data would be goal dot attributes like that. And then the ID would be goal dot ID like that. And now I sit here and look at it for a moment and see if I'm happy with this API. By the way, this is not the final abstraction. Eventually, it gets abstracted one level out that makes it even simpler because I want to be able to, for it to basically be, I want to be able to just say this is what the ID is, and then it automatically sets the attributes based on that ID. But this use update resource needs to be flexible enough to allow you to manage it however you like. All right, I'm talking into a vacuum here. Okay, so is there any other data that we need out of here? Maybe it should be form. Ooh, I got a spammer. Ha! How do I report them? Here we go, report. Maybe that one. Did that work? Do I have to report all of them? Uh, where is it? There we go. Report. My first spammer. Actually, that's not true. Sometimes I get spammers on like videos, which is weird because some people do honest comments on my videos and they don't get taken down, but spammer stuff could often get through. I know this is going to be boring, but I really want to get this API right. Maybe instead of data, we call this form. I think it's safe to call it that at this point. Yeah. No, because yeah, maybe you call it form and then result. And so this is setting the initial attributes of the form. Ugh. But then when it has a result, what do we do? Do we then set the form to the result? I think you do. If you have the initial form value though, then you can easily roll back the data if need be. But that might be overthinking it for now. Yeah, okay, I think this will do. Now, do we have reset form in here? Yeah, actually, no, if we have the initial data, then we could, for example, click on reset form and it would bring it back to what it was. Hmm. Okay, well, let's have a look at more of how we would actually use this and imagine that we're using it inside of a template. Um, so this would be a queue dialog, for example. No, let's go simpler than that. Let's just add a queue form. No, it doesn't format the same here. But this would actually be, I would actually be using my form component. So update model dialog. There we go. Update model dialog. And ideally, you don't actually have to put anything in there. How about we do this? We might actually take that and put it in here. So we've got it sort of in a one example. Oh, I'm getting more spam. Report. Portal. Yeah. So when you run this, you need to give it the form. And I want this to be really clean. Goal updater dot form. So that makes sense. That's a really obvious API. And then you would want to be able to say reset, or like at reset is equal to goal updater dot reset. So you can easily reset the form if you need to. Update goal updater dot update. So if this is going to be resettable, you can still just send through the form like this, and then it gets stamped as an initial value. Yeah, but we don't really call that, we call that form now though. But it looked like this was creating its own form. Okay, using the form service, it then wraps that. Okay, so we don't actually have a form directly. Cool, so let's actually change the word data here. I know I'm changing this a lot, but this is what happens when you build an API. No, not in that spot. Crap. Let's come back here, do it again. They're all changed to form. Let's look for the word data. No, no. Yeah, this is kind of like the response data then. I'm going to get rid of that for now. Creating. No, that should be updating. Okay. That I'll work on extracting that in a second. But now we need to be able to set an initial value. And in my API, I want that. I want to be able to know what that initial value is, and I want to be able to say reset. So basically, yeah, like what I'm doing here, I just want to be able to say reset, and that sends it back to its initial value. Not nulls like you would expect with a create form. If you call reset on a create form, this would just set all the values to null. But if you do it on an update form, it sets it to whatever they originally were for that update form. Hang on though. What if I want to change the ID? So right now, okay, this complicates things. What would happen if I change the ID now? So really this should be, I should be able to actually make this a watch effect. Yeah, ID should probably be a function so that we can use watch effect there, now that I think about it. Or better still, just a computed property. Yeah, if we enforce that this is computed, then I know that it's always going to be... No, 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 we can't have it computed because then you can't change it later on. No, goal ID needs to be, this needs to be something that we can change so that you could potentially do something like this, for example, const changing ID is equal to a ref like this, and that might have a 5 to begin with, but then if you want to reuse this composable, and there's a good chance you would want to reuse this composable, you want to be able to then just like send through the ID, and then by simply changing that ID, it also changes what the form's attributes are. So we almost, oh, okay. But then if I change the ID, how do I know what those new attributes are going to be? Because you can't just change the ID. You have to actually change the goal itself. Oh, shit. That's right. I think I'm gonna have to lie down and think about this. See, usually this isn't a big problem for me because I'm using state libraries as well. But what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to um, detach the concept of updating a resource. I want to detach that from using state libraries. This is a much easier problem to solve when you're using a state library, or I use something like Vuex ORM, and that's easy peasy because I just say, well, when the ID changes, change the form, just find the model and change the form values to whatever the new model is. But I can't do that here. Here, I need to offer flexibility so that people can use this however they want. They need to be able to say, well, in that case, maybe you just make it less reactive. So if they want to change, if they want to use this composable, they would manually change the ID and the form themselves. Hmm. Actually, I think that's the answer. So then you have like a set form composable. All right, so how about this? No, 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 you don't need a set form composable. You can just set it directly on there. You don't need a function for it. Okay, so there's not really much of an issue here. Then for the goal updater, reset. But okay, so but this then breaks down the concept of giving it basically stamping the initial value. Because if I stamp the initial value of the form and then allow them to call reset, what if I stamp the initial value, we change the ID a few times, and then call reset, then the new value of the form is incorrect. So I can't do that. So maybe we simply don't offer that functionality. Or we have a set form function that restamps the value. No, because then it's not clear in the API what happens. So I don't like that either. So I think the idea is probably keep this composable as a little bit more bare bones. Oh, so this is the thing that I'm wrestling with. Do we make the composable more bare bones? Therefore, it's slightly harder to use, but a little bit less mysterious then? Or is there a way that I can maintain the ease of it without making things a mystery? What about this? Oh no, I won't do API changes here. I want to see what that would look like. What does reset do on an updated form? So maybe you just, instead of having a reset function, it would look something like this. And the ID, you'd say goal updated.id is something different. Dot value is equal to whatever the new ID for that is. So this is the other way we could go about this. So what we could do then is we could still have a reset function. And if you don't give it anything, now this is a problem. The problem is the synchronization between the ID and the form is not possible without some sort of state. If we don't have state, then there's no way of me saying when I change the ID to this, then the form is equal to that. And therefore, you're putting this into the user's hands and they manually have to do it. So by adding a reset function here, we're actually making it more confusing. Whereas if we leave it up to them, the user, or the dev to do that, I don't know, is there a way? The other thing you could do is allow them to pass in some reset functionality to say what that looks like with their app. I don't like that either, though. It's like, why would you even bother doing that? Why not just let them write it out manually because it's such simple code? Ah, shit. I think I just need to lie down and think about this for a bit. I refuse to allow this to be a lazy solution because this will ruin the whole, like, this is such a pivotal part. Let's jump into create and see if I'm doing everything right there. Create resource. Now that I've thought about this more deeply, see, this is simpler because you don't have to deal with any state at all, really. I mean, I might change the API in some spaces. Yeah, okay. So create resources, it's kind of, it's a much simpler concept. So maybe then this is just a function. What if, no, because you want it to give you a form behind the scenes. Ah, shit. Okay, hang on, I need to stand up and think about this. Luckily, I got a bit of cord on my headphones. I'll just stand up and speak into the abyss. The other thing is our ID can automatically be picked up. So we could potentially say when you change the form value, if the ID changes as well, no. See, when you're dealing with state, this is the reason this is easier is I can just put a watcher on the ID here, and then I can say, hey, when the ID changes, find that model and then change the form to the model with that ID. It's just easy. And then all you have to do to reset the form is you literally just change the ID and everything just falls into place and works. It's a beautiful API. Okay, with this current ID API, is it obvious? So if no, see the thing that's not obvious is if I change that form now, because I'm automatically guessing the IDs, if I change this form now, as the dev, I would expect the ID to also change. In fact, I would expect to not even have to think about the ID. You know, you could potentially be a dev that doesn't even worry about what the ID is. You just set the form, and since it's got the ID, you just expect it to work. So then potentially what you could do is you could completely remove the concept of an ID being being exposed here. Therefore, you can't try doing this thing where you change the ID. You simply have to change the form itself to be updating a new form. So then you've got the reuse. Oh fuck! I think that's it. Oh crap! I just swore. Sorry. Um, Gosh, please don't get me in trouble, YouTube. I don't want to get like a bad stamp or something like that. But anyway, it's happened now. Whatever will be, will be. Okay, I think this is the answer. We get rid of the concept of an ID as something that is exposed. You still have an ID that's used internally, but you do the guessing at the last minute. When you perform the update, that's when it then tries to set the ID. Okay, okay, let's see if I can code this now. Um, First, I need to get very clear on the API. That's a mistake I often make. You don't send through an ID for a goal updater. You only send through the form. You might send through ID field. That's, yeah, okay, so that's an option that we might have, which basically overwrites how you find the identifier, but the ID is not reactive. It is always taken off of the form. So I guess technically it's reactive through the form. So then I could say, for example, my ID field is my ID. And then in this situation, because it's kind of weird with Strapi where they've got a form that's kind of laid out this way, in this situation, you would do this. You would spread that on there, and then you would say that the ID is equal to the goal ID. That's how you would deal with it in Strapi scenario. But then, of course, later on, you would then abstract this so you don't end up with this ugly code here. I mean, it's not that ugly. Okay, so that means the options needs to be able to accept an ID field. Oh shit! I think this is it. This is going to be the right API. Um, so const ID field is equal to, and then we have a functionality that tries to guess some functionality that tries to guess what the ID field is. So this changes from trying to return what the ID is to what the ID field is. So then let's get rid of all of that. Actually, we might use that code in a second. And we'll come back here to our guess object ID to guess object identifier, ID field. Yeah, so it's clearer because ID implies to me that you're actually going to get an ID back, whereas that's not what we want. We want to be able to guess what the ID field is so we can then use it later on. Okay, so we take in the object, we go through our identifiers, and if object.identifier exists, then we return whatever that identifier is. No, wait, it's not object.ident. Yeah, it would be. Then you just did, okay, you return the identifier like that. So this becomes a lot simpler. And then it's essentially trying to find the identifier. Otherwise, you return false here. And then if we get false here, we go ahead and set it to ID. That's what I might actually do. Yeah, how about this? Let's say const field is equal to that. And then I can return here field. And if I've got it, then we say field. Otherwise, I want you to return ID. Oh, there we go. Thank you, VS Code. So it's going to do its best. If it can't find anything, it's just going to fall back to ID. And it's probably, frankly, just not going to work then because you haven't supplied an ID. And now we say ID field. Yeah, so we can say if we have got options.id field, then we'll have to change this to let ID field. Then ID field is equal to that ID field that was passed through. If you don't have one, then we're going to do our best to try and guess it using this guess object ID function. Guess object ID, and then we pass through, I guess it's form.value. Is the form set at this point? Yeah. Oh, hang on. What if they give us the form after the fact? So if they give us the form, well then that if they give us the form after the fact, then they should have given us the ID. No, we want to be more generous. So what I could do is I could do another guess for the object ID field at the time. So how about this? Otherwise, we'll return undefined here. So this might, our ID field might end up being undefined. We can get rid of all this now. I think I'm pretty confident with that. And then when we perform the update, we can come in here and say if we do not have an ID field there, I should be more specific. ID field is equal to undefined, or actually no, actual undefined. Or maybe null as well. Could that happen? No, that shouldn't happen in this scenario. If it's undefined, then God, my brain's exploding. I've lost where I'm at now. Okay, then we try and guess it again. And the reason we try and guess it again is because it's likely that they gave us the form after the fact, and therefore when we guessed it off the form, it didn't work properly. So because this code might run and then they set the form. So let's do this. We'll say if there is no ID field, we basically try and guess for it again. And then, and I'm definitely going to have to clean this up a little bit, if we still do not have an ID field, so if it's basically still equal to undefined, then we'll throw an error. Throw new error, unable to detect ID. Try setting ID with options.id field. Do you need to set a custom ID field with options.id field? Yeah, something like that. Oh man, I'm so glad this is almost done. We don't need that anymore. That's been abstracted into its own function. Okay, so there's no such thing as id.value anymore. Let's see if there's any other occurrences of that. No, this is the only one. Who's that? One of my dogs is. You right, Lily? Do you need to go outside? Oh, I think they're okay. I'll take them in a second. All right. Was it just a bit of a distraction? So now I can pretty confidently say that the ID should be equal to options dot. No, what am I doing? Hang on, where's the form coming from? Have we got form service.form? Okay, it gets passed through there. All right, so I don't need to use the form service. So now the ID is equal to form dot value. Why didn't I get the dot value automatically there? That should know it's a ref. Unless it got changed at some point. No, okay, so my ID might be screwing up. And then we can use the ID field because we should have confidence by now that that is correct. All right, so now I think we've got a nice API. I'm just gonna have to test the crap out of this at some point. That I'm pretty happy with. All right, so let's just jump into the index page and take this for a spin. What am I doing? Jumping out of full screen. Oh, whoops, I was already out of full screen. And we will grab window like so, open this up. And let's give it a try. So what am I doing? Index page. And then we can say use update resource. So we can say const, we'll just say goal updater is equal to use update, use update resource. This is such a classic example of where I'd love to use TypeScript, but that's okay. We now need to give it a schema. Now I've got the goal schema. Is going to let me import that. No, it's not. It doesn't do auto imports very well for JSON files. So let's come in here. Goal schema is sitting in. I think I've got a. Where's a goal schema? Yeah, goal schema. From composables slash models slash goal slash goal schema. Yeah, it doesn't like importing JSON. I'll probably have to say here .json. No, I think it'll figure it out. Let's try that. Maybe we'll just have like a button, I guess. Click is equal to update. And now what's it not happy with? Yeah, this bound to have gotten something wrong. Properties of undefined reading form. Okay. Let's get a little bit more specific with that error. Options.form. Well, okay, I guess we'll set this to an empty object so that it's possible to do this without options, even though it might not actually make sense. Well, it could make sense because you might want to do your manipulation after the fact, which is one of the joys of the composition API. We can allow you to do either or. So let's try that at refresh again. Update was successful and not defined in the instance. Okay, yeah, of course, that makes sense. So goal updater dot update. So the next thing we'll do is basically flesh this out. So you get the goal schema, and then you send through your stuff. Actually, let's go to the README that I had before. And I was basically sending it through like this, where I was sending the form and the attributes. I might actually just grab all that. We've got a goal here. And then our goal updater is going to receive this. We don't actually need the ID field because that should actually be guessed for us. That should be all that I need to do in order for it to work. And then it should find that ID itself. Now we need our Strapi backend running. So let's cd into our backend yarn develop there. And then when that's done, we'll actually jump into it. So we'll say they use 1337. Yep, there it is. Oh gosh, I don't remember. I think that might be it. Oh man, I don't remember. It's like secret 123 or something. That's okay. I know how to get an ID. goodness, couldn't remember. I know that a lot of these have got an ID, so now we can test this out. User dashboard, goal indexer, all this deeply nested data. Let's try and update the one with an ID of 7. Oh, by the way, I've got a database with this. I might as well just open the bloody database. All right, I'll throw that to the side, throw that to the side. Oh man, I'm just excited to see if this works. Come on. Then again, whether or not it works or not is not the exciting part. The exciting part is the API because you can get it work. I don't care who you are, you can figure it out. Everybody can figure it out if they work, for long enough at a problem. So let me open this up on my other screen. There it is here. So there's our goals. And let's actually change the one with an ID of 2. So it's going to be easy to see what's going on here. ID is equal to 2. So now our form gets set. It should be able to guess the ID of the form so that when it does the update, it updates it correctly. And now with the goal updater, I should be able to use our form. So I should be able to say model form. Oh man, what did I call it? Something form. Schema form, of course. It's got schema form, which of course needs the schema, which is going to be equal to goal schema. Let's try this again. And of course I need to model something there. So v model is equal to, and now this should give us a form 3, which is part of the glory of it, dot form dot value. Yep, and that's automatically generating our form. It's automatically pre-filled that with gym twice a week, though technically that would be something different in the real world because, here it actually says my goal. But now I can do that, and let's give the default description as well, just to double check that does work. This is really cool because this is all dynamic. I mean, I'm only showing you this with one model, but it scales to as many models as we like. Fun times at the gym. Yeah, okay, it was a long shot that was going to work first go. Bad request, what went wrong? Field ID is not defined by type goal. All right, what did that look like? That's being sent through as one of the variables. What I could use is Lodash to say without whatever my ID field is. Shit, I didn't think about that. I should not think about that. Okay, so have I got Lodash ES? Package.json for the front. Lodash ES, yep. So now I should easily be able to say, hey, when you submit this, or actually when I create the form in the first place. So we're going to need, yeah, when we use the use form service. Oh, hang on, what's happening here? We've then got make form. All right, so it looks like what I need to do is separate that identifier logic I had out and say here instead, if it is equal to, you can't put the identifier logic in here though, because the user might define what their own identifier is. So that would be bad code. Ah, man. Oh, man. Oh, man. So basically what I need to be able to say is some options here. Well, we can say without. So when you say use form, you can pass the data in and say without these fields. So we'll have an options object here. then we can come down here and say const, no, we'll say, yeah, const without is equal to, can I use with, hang on, is without the one that you use when you're dealing with objects? Find out in a second. Without. No. So maybe it's like reject. No, we'll just have a look at objects. I'm just going to have to go down and see if I can find it. Omit. That's what I want. Okay. So let's say omit. We'll use the nomenclature of low dash there. Is equal to options dot omit. No, without. I don't know. I think without is actually better wording. I understand why they had to call it something different because they're using, arrays as well. But we'll say options dot without is equal to either options without or an empty array. So then we can import omit from low-es. And now here, we need to go into field entries and omit whatever is within that without. So we have to say we have to do it at this level. Here we go. So there's all of our fields, and then we omit anything from without. Okay, so now what I can do is say use form, and I can send through here, but without whatever our ID field is inside of that array there. So that should get rid of the ID when we make that request, if everything went well just now. Payload. No, that ID was still sent through. How do we build up that variables list? Field entries for each, which tells me that we need to do some debugging because I would have expected those field, oh wait, that's coming from the schema. See, this is where it's getting complicated now. So do I get it? Do I add that functionality to a schema? No, that would be weird. That would be weird. So the answer is to change this code here. It's using the key and the field. So field entries. So essentially we could just say that form service exposes field entries as well. Fields and field entries. Yeah, this is lower level stuff anyway, so I think I'm okay with that. So now I can say here, is that the only time I use field entries? No, I'm using it down there as well. Where I also don't want to use it. Yeah, no, I don't want to use it there either. So, okay, so essentially we want to get rid of this and use field entries from our form service because it's able to specify that there's things we don't actually want in those field entries. And now that's going to be dot value. Yeah. Okay, so it's okay. Whoops. Somehow I lost the S there. I believe that's dot value as well. Okay, something's blowing up on me. Getting closer though. Oh, this is not dot value. No, because it's something that's static. So I intentionally did not make that something that uses dot value. Use scheme is defined but never used. Okay, we can easily fix that. Let's try this again. Okay. The ID is still going through, so now let's jump into use form. And I'm not going to use debugger yet. I'm going to do some good old trusty console.log for now. And oh, hang on. I passed through without. Yeah, but we need to get rid of this anyway because that doesn't make sense anymore. And we want to do a console.log here just to ensure we're not getting that ID being sent through. Yeah, goal and description. They're the only things being sent through. But when I send update, in variables, we're getting the ID. And then in update goal, it's setting the ID. Yeah, and then in the data, it's sending back the ID. All right, so I've just blatantly done something wrong somewhere else down the line. There's no way that's going to be wrong. I mean, I just saw the field, so that's certainly not going to have the ID, but I'll check anyway. Yep, goal description, which means that my problem resides in this use update resource. This is where we get the variables. Man, what is going on here? Yeah, that's correct. We only get goal and description. Form service dot form dot value. I mean, that's the other thing to take a look at that. So let's go into update and we'll console.log that there because that it could be wrong at that point. Yes. Interesting. So somewhere form service, the form there is getting the wrong value. All right, let's see where the form service is being initialized. Use form. Okay, then we call make form. All right. I see the problem. So now somewhere in make form, we also need to basically have this emitting functionality, which is fine. That totally makes sense. When you're making a form, you want to have that flexibility. Okay, so we give it the schema. And this also has the option to set some default values. So why is that not being done there? Use form, and then it gives it a form. No, I'll call this I don't know, data. Um, initial form. Let's call it that. Okay, hang on. So is this even getting called? Or are we getting that initial form passed through? Okay, hang on. Ah, man, okay, I'm putting myself into a tiffy. So use form and then the second value of that. So we are actually supplying our own form here, which is nothing. Oh, that's right, because no, we did actually send through an initial value there when I used this API, meaning it's just going to say ref and then use that initial form. Okay, so that's the problem. So we have to use emit there as well. We can't just use it on the fields. We have to say, hey, use that initial form and then emit anything in without. Am I also going to have to use that though here where we make the form? Yes. Yes, I am. So now we're going to space this out better. It's essentially the same thing. This is starting to look ugly to me, so to be honest, I'll probably end up changing that, but we'll leave it just for a moment. And now what doesn't it like? Reference to emit. Okay. The problem is that emit function is not going to work unless there's actually a value there. Okay, so in that case, do this the easy way for now because my brain is tired. Initial form, if it exists, then do that, and then without. No, hang on, that should work because this is testing we have that initial form first. Oh man. Okay, so as far as I can tell, this code should work. And so should that because we're running a check beforehand. So what is it squawking about? See, this is what happens when I get tired. I then stop reading the error, which is really bad. I should take a break or okay, properties on okay. Just log the form there to check that's actually working. Yeah, okay. I think we're getting this as a ref. All right, let's go for a simpler approach. I'm not sure this will be the optimal approach though, but I'm thinking I might just perform the emit afterwards. So how about this? At this point, I believe we have the form and it looks correct. There it is there, dot value. So what happens if I then just call emit at this point? There's something weird going on. It's nested one level deeper than it should be. Hmm. But if you wrap a ref in a ref, pretty sure it just gives you the normal value back. Yeah, I've tested this. Oh, in that emit, I need to say form.value. All right, there we go. So now what I should be able to do is say form.value is equal to emit using form.value without. Okay, let's see what this does. There we go. We get the goal and the description. ID is undefined, and I think I might know why that is. So the ID is not... Oh, because that's supposed to sit on the form. Shit, which breaks the whole thing. All right, so the problem I have now... I'm about to take a break, by the way. The problem I have now is that the ID belongs on the form in order for us to do the update. So you'll notice that down here... Yeah, we've got, for example, this code here that does the ID field guess. But then up here as well, the ID field... Yeah, we're pulling this off of the form. Oh, man. All right, so in this case, I think we need to change the time when we do the emit. We want to wait until we're updating and then perform our emit. So we pull it off of the form service. And I think maybe we maintain this functionality just in case we end up actually needing it, because I think that certainly will come in handy. I don't think I do want to remove that. Oop. Okay, that's all right. So this should be too hard to do. We just need to come down here and say, is that still going to work when I don't add an emit? Options dot without. Oh, I don't know how that happened. Probably because I wrote it. Oh, okay. By default, that needs to be an empty object. Oops. Okay, so now what we do is we don't do the emitting until the last minute, and we simply emit whatever the identifier is, because we know what the ID field is by this point. And I'll probably have another function for this, but I just want to get this working for now. So const form for submit. I apologize. This is bad code. I'm doing tired bad code, and this should not be something that you model. Then we can say form dot value. Where is our form? No, form service dot form. dot value, which has the ID in it, and we're simply going to omit what the field ID is, which is in this case ID field. It can't happen here. No, it can't happen here. It has to happen, or can it? Here's the query. It's computed. Data.attributes. So this is where we set it. Here. All right, so we just need to do it there then. So in that case, can I just take all this logic and move it to the point where it's actually needed, which is here, when we're actually creating... No, because we're not just creating the attribute. Yeah, no, that's not going to work. We need that emit functionality here as well. Oh, man. So I'm going to need some very clear language around what is a form with an ID and what is a form without an ID. And honestly, I think I just answered the question as I said that out loud. A form should not have an ID in it. I don't think. No. No, because you hit an endpoint with an ID, the form does not actually have the ID. So for now, I'll just do this emit here, but that's something I certainly need to fix. So it's going through every attribute and setting it to true. So I guess what I could do is just say if key is equal to ID field, then return. So just don't run that. Okay, but I think there's another spot I need to do this. So that's for the variables. All right, it's happening in both the places. Why would that show up in the attributes? Oh no, it's not. Okay, so it worked in the attributes. And this one, you can omit the ID field. Yes. Oh man, this is so dodgy. Pull that in. And I think there will be one more place that I need to fix this. Oh no, hang on. Looks like that's done it. My goal should now have changed. There we go. And it did change. Okay, so that worked. The next thing I quickly want to test before I wrap up for now, because I need to take a break and then I'll come back and do some more coding, is that I want to be able to change the ID field to something different, like my ID. my ID, and then say here ID field is equal to my ID. I don't think this will work though, and it shouldn't. So let's just say nope and nope there, but I just want to check the request is correct. Good, that's right. ID is undefined because it couldn't find it and it doesn't end up in the form. Okay, so that's actually working correctly. We should potentially be able to set our own ID. And you know what? How about we test it by doing this? I will set all of those to ID. And then we'll even say, we'll explicitly say that the ID field is, I don't know, 7. Whoops. No. We'll just say nope there. This should still work. No, it did not. So that ID is being equal to undefined. I set ID field there. If I jump into use update resource, it looks like the problem is here. Form.value.id field. Oh, no, the ID field should be ID as a string like that. Apologize. Blah. And there we go. Looks like that did work. All right, maybe it didn't. Okay, it's just the form just hasn't updated there. So anyway, that should be something that's easy to fix. I'm going to take a break. But thank you, everybody, for watching. This is one of those videos that are not... one of those things in work where it's not very particularly fun. Actually, to be honest, I do find this fun. You know, pushing and stretching to try and find that perfect API, even if it takes that extra little bit of work. But I think it's worth it. So this actually isn't even the final abstraction. As I keep saying, I'm just trying to make this process as simple as possible, as easy as possible, as clean as possible. But then eventually, it's going to look something like this, where you can say goal updater is equal to use update goal. So notice that I've said use update goal instead of use update resource. So this is something a lot more specific, or even use update model. Actually, I'll show you that first. No, because use update goal, because that's the final abstraction. And now I don't need to pass in the schema, because since it's use update goal, behind the scenes, I can happily pass through the schema. And there's no, I don't have to worry about coupling at this point, because a goal should know that it's a goal. I don't have to pass through the ID field, because a goal knows what its ID field is. And I don't even have to pass through the form, because a goal knows what its form is as well. And yeah, actually, so that's pretty much it. Now, one thing I will be able to do is say goalUpdater.id.value is equal to something like 7. And then whenever I change that, behind the scenes, I'll have code that basically says, well, let's change this from goalUpdater to, I don't know, model resource. Behind the scenes, what this will do is say the form value of that is going to be equal to the goal with an ID of 7. So we'll say, for example, goal.find, however I end up finding that, using the ID of 7, and then I'll just like literally pass that through. And I don't know, this will be like a make form or something. Anyway, this is the point being, this will all be done behind the scenes, right? It's code that looks something like that, meaning the API that I get is as simple as this. I just change the ID, and that automatically updates the form for me as well. So using one composable, I can now easily update multiple different forms. And when I'm ready to change the form I'm updating, I change the ID, and then the goal updater dot form is going to update to reflect that change of ID. This is a really cool API. I love it. And then when I'm done with that, the last abstraction is going to be goal service. is equal to use goal. Now, a goal service is something you wouldn't use all the time. If you have a page that is going to update goals, create goals, delete goals, do all of that stuff, I wrap it all into one service that basically utilizes these smaller services. So then eventually you start doing stuff like this. Goalservice.id, and you know what, you could probably just pass it in directly if you wanted to by saying like ID is equal to whatever. But aside from that, you could then say goal service.id is equal to, this will be .value, 7, and then you can say goal service.delete, and that will delete the goal with an ID of 7. Or you could say goal service dot form dot value is equal to, and then you give it something like a new goal name, and then you can say goal service dot save, right? So you can do code that looks something like this, and that means that it's now that we've set that to 7, the form for the goal service behind the scenes is going to change because, by the way, it's using this under the hood, so everything's nicely separated. And then when we call save, it then uses that data to then go ahead and save it. So that's saving, and then obviously the same thing for create. And by the way, just to make this go full circle now, I could then say goal service dot, I could get rid of that ID part there. Goal service dot create. Well, we could set the form to begin with. Okay, so this doesn't need an ID. You say, give me a goal service, give it a name of name, a goal name of name, then go ahead and create that goal. And now I can console.log goal service.id.value because that will have been set behind the scenes when I created it. When I get this response back, it automatically sets the ID. So then I could say goal service dot form dot value dot goal and set that equal to something different, like something different. And then I could say goal service dot save, and then that would save the goal. So hopefully you can see, like, you can just do some amazing, incredible APIs with the composition API when you do things this way. Anyway, I've been at this for over an hour and a half now. So I'm going to go take a break and then probably plug away at this a little bit more. Maybe not online because I find it harder to think online. That might be a good thing, though. Maybe I just need to keep practicing thinking online so I get better and better at this. But yeah, thanks to everybody who stuck with me and watched. I really enjoyed this one, and I look forward to finishing this and releasing this API so that you can all give it a try.